Right, welcome everyone. This is now session 4. We're going to continue with the exercise we started last week, which was from this PDF on Learn. So it's exercise 4-3, Revit Materials Concepts Applied. So can I get you, if you haven't already, just go on to Learn, go on to the course, go into topic 2, Revit Materials. Just scroll down to here, chapter 4, Revit Materials. That's the PDF that I'm referring to. So have that one open on your second monitor. The file that we downloaded last week was the Revit Materials tutorial Revit file. So that's the one that we're currently using for the exercises in chapter 4. So if you haven't already downloaded it, you'll need to download it, upgrade it to 2019, save it, and I suggest you actually add your initials to the file name so you can personalise it. And then just keep it, because we will be using this file for obviously this session and next session. Once the materials have all been created, we are going to, or as we create them, we're going to put them into our own custom library, and I'll talk about that later. So I'm going to get you to create your own library, and then once each material is created, and you can possibly do this after you've done them, created them all, but it might be a good idea to actually add them to your library as you create them one by one, and then build your library that way. So rather than perhaps transferring the materials from this Revit file to another Revit file to use your materials, which you can do, we're going to put them into a library which is then accessible to all Revit projects, if that makes sense. So it's a common library that you control, okay? And it's a library that will follow you. Basically, it's yours, you take it wherever you like. All right. So if you can open up this this Revit file from last week. Now again, in conjunction with exercise 4-3, there are a couple of web links here to websites. The first one is for the carpets. The second one is for the paint materials, which we'll have a look at today. The 3 carpet materials that you're going to produce are up here on the site itself. These are the texture maps that you'll need to download to produce the 3 carpet materials. Okay, so as I said last week, what I got you to do was to actually create a folder called Texture Maps, 2-Texture Maps. Before we go any further, I'd like you to actually create another folder called 4-Material Library. Okay, so in the same location. So wherever you've saved this Revit file for the practice for this exercise, I'd like you to create these folders. All right, so I'll just minimise that. Now, just digressing slightly. Now I'm now sort of talking to all students, including external students. Now, going back to topic 1, rendering concepts. I've gone through and I thank everybody that has currently emailed me the 4 images that I've asked for this exercise. So I think most of you in the class have done that. There are 1 or 2 still outstanding. So just to be quite clear, you need to complete this exercise and you need to email me the 4 images that you render in the exercise itself. So if you haven't done that yet, can you please do that? All right. Now, I think the internal class, you people are pretty good. I think there may be 1 or 2 that haven't. The 4008 external unit, I think, is also pretty good. However, there are still a few people that haven't submitted. This is not an assessment, it's an exercise, but the reason I'm asking you to send me these images is mainly for external students so that I know that they are engaged. They have started working on the unit. Now, the external students for the 5016, which is the rendering and animation unit, have received very few from those students, okay? There's a lot of students in the external classes that have not sent me these images. Now, I don't care if you've done the unit before, if you're doing it for a second time, I need you to send me those images, please. All right? So, getting back to our topic 2. So if you haven't already, can you just download these 3 images? Okay, there is actually a 4th one there, which is a tile material, which you can download as well. So download the 4 images, and to download them, just right mouse on them and go Save Image As, and download them into that 2-material, download them into the 2-texture maps folder. Okay, so just download them, have them all ready into that particular folder. Okay, so the 3 carpet and the tile material. Okay, when you've done that, we'll come back to Revit and just open up the materials editor. And can you just make sure that you have the AEC materials palette visible here, lower left-hand corner. Now, I've noticed with this, with mine, I've got a yellow triangle here with an exclamation mark. When I click on the AEC materials, nothing is presenting in this down here. So it's not seeing any materials. So that does happen from time to time, and the only way to really fix that is to actually close the file. So save and essentially close Revit and reopen Revit, and that hopefully will refresh that library. Okay, so file is back up. Okay, so that's now working. I can now see all of the categories and all of the materials. So I guess the thing is, when you're working in the material editor, you know, don't be afraid to actually expand it out to make it as large as it needs to be, so you can see what you're doing. So in our last session, we started creating the first of our carpet materials. So I'd like you to locate that carpet material in this section here. So the materials up the top here, where are they? Where are they located? In the project. Okay, these are the project materials. Okay. So just find the carpet material that we started last week. Now you can either search for it by name. How else can you search for it?
Project materials tab. Go into
yeah, so up here.
carpet.
So it's a carpet, isn't it? Okay. So we're searching by, I guess, class or category here. So I can just choose carpet here. And that's the new one that we started last week, the CPT1. All right, it's all coming back. So what we did was we created the material. How did we create the material? How did we do it? We duplicated. Okay, we made a copy of an existing material, We then went to the interface floor website, didn't we? And we did a search for the actual carpet, which was the Cologne 12420-6363 peat. That was the product. So one of the things that we did we gained from the website was the URL, which we copied and pasted here. We also put in under comments where the carpet is being used in public spaces, the manufacturer, the model, and down here the mark, which is the same as the name of the material. So we filled in the identity information. I don't think we went to graphics, did we? We got as far as that. The next thing I think we did was appearance. What did we do in appearance? So this is the appearance asset. What did we do there? We didn't change the name of it. We made a copy, didn't we? We made a duplicate of the appearance asset. Okay? So if you are ever duplicating material, one of the first things that you do, one of the first things I do, is actually go straight to the appearance tab and duplicate the appearance asset. Okay? Because conceivably, well, it is. I mean, the appearance asset, if you duplicate the material, then the duplicate is using the same appearance asset as the original. So you have to make a copy of the appearance asset to make that one unique as well. Okay, so it's a two-step process. All right, and it's a common mistake that people make, is that they duplicate the material, but they make changes to the appearance asset and then affect the source material. Okay, the other material that's sharing it. And I said last week that the hand indicates that the asset is being shared. Now, if there is a 0 above the hand, it means that the asset is unique. It's not being shared. Okay, it's all coming back? Right, okay. Anyone taking notes? No? Good. Yes, question?
So you select duplicate on the material.
Yes.
In that second, so in your duplicate material, it still shows one being shared.
In the new material here, it should show 0.
So if I just did it again, so on carpet 1, I click duplicate and then went to the new material and it still shows 1.
In the original material.
No, in the duplicate.
This one. So if you expand information, the name of the asset, is it CPT1?
Oh no, because I actually can't locate my new carpet from last week, so I don't know if I saved it incorrectly. So I was just going through the process again.
Okay.
On
So,
the duplicate, so it has all the original, I guess.
yeah, so if you're going through it, yes, if you're going through it, if you're redoing it, you'll need to obviously make a copy of, this is the one that we made a copy of. So this is the copy, which we called CPT1. Once we put in the identity information, we went across to the appearance tab and we clicked this button here, which is duplicate this asset. Okay, and that just gives you whatever the asset name was. It just gives you a name to, like a duplicate name. Yeah. And then we go down to information, we expand this section here, and we actually physically change it to CPT1. Okay, so it makes sense. And we also change the description to reflect what the model is, the Cologne 6363 peat. So yeah, step 1 is duplicating the material. Step 2 really is duplicating the appearance asset. Okay, before you do anything else, so you know it's done. Okay. Yeah. Because if you make changes, if you don't duplicate and you make changes down here, obviously it's difficult to know, if you're going to reverse those changes, it's difficult to know what they were before you change them. So, new material, new appearance asset, which is duplicated. Identity data has been filled in. Back to the appearance tab. Now, what we do from here is that if you can appreciate that these materials that we're generating are derived from things called texture maps. Okay, so a texture map is a photograph of the actual product. So not all materials are derived from photographs. Some can be artificially generated. These are derived from a photograph of the product. So the photograph we refer to as a texture map. So what we need to do is, you can see that currently we have an image here. This image here is a texture map, but it's not the correct one. We need to actually swap this out now. So we need to replace it with one of the texture maps that we downloaded from the Learn site. So to replace the texture map here, you click on the name underneath. Okay, so this is the image. Just click on the name underneath, which takes you out to an Autodesk folder called Mats, short for materials. Now, what you need to do is navigate back to your 2-texture maps folder and find that first texture map, which is the 6363, the image. Okay. Okay, so if I view these as large icons, you'll see that I've only got the 3 carpet ones there. So the first one here, that's not the correct one. This is the one here, the darker one here, which has the 6363 in the file name, is the one you're looking for. Okay. All right. So if you can appreciate that, what we're doing is we're clicking on the current name of the image, which takes us out to the select file dialog, and you're going back to your own folder where you've downloaded these texture maps, and you're physically selecting the correct one and clicking open, and it swaps it in. So I guess with the modification of the appearance asset, we are changing the texture map. So that's really sort of part one. There's a few more things that we need to do here. So it's not enough to actually just put an image in of the product. Okay, as important is the scaling of that image. Okay, and I think I did talk about that last week. So, you know, if you're building, you know, if you're creating a texture, a material for a brick wall, for instance, and you know there's standard bricks which are, you know, 230 long by 76 high, then if you have a sample image or sample photo of a portion of a brick wall, you then have to go into and have a look at scaling that particular image to make sure that you get the correct number of bricks in a certain height of wall. So in this case, and it applies to all materials basically, so once you've actually put your texture map in, to actually check or have a look at the scaling, you click directly on the image, which opens up the texture editor, expand it as required, and you can see that you've got a measurement across the bottom, which is I call the x-axis, and a measurement up the side, which I call the y-axis. scaling wise, there is a scale area down here. They just refer to it as width and height. Okay. Now, when you're scaling something, I would suggest that can you see the little blue square here with a little chain in it? Okay. So that locks. That's your that locks your scale proportions. So what I suggest you do is actually, if it's blue, it means it's locked. If it's not blue, click on it, turn off the blue, it means it's unlocked. Okay, so you need to unlock that. Does anyone recall what size this carpet square is or needs to be?
500 by 500.
Very good. All right, 500 by 500. So how do we know that?
It's set on the website.
Set it on the website. Okay, so again, if you're getting these images directly from the manufacturer, get as much information as you can from the website, write it down, do a screenshot or whatever, and then obviously use that information to build your material. So the scale we can type directly in here, 500 mil by 500 millimetres. So see how it changes up here?
Is the actual millimetres required?
You can put in, you can put 50 cm. You can actually type in feet and inches and it will convert to metric. I don't know if you know that, but with Revit generally, if you're actually drawing a linear object like a wall or a line, you can actually type it in feet and inches and it'll convert to metric.
Having slight measurement
Yeah, the question is, or the observation is that when we actually typed the 500 in each like this and click done and go back into it, some students are getting 500 point something, or is anyone else getting that? I honestly can't explain that. Mine's working, so I'm not sure what's going on out in the classroom, but that's very odd. Okay. If it's, I guess if it's just 500.1 or 0.13, I wouldn't worry too much about it. If it's a big difference, then I think that could be an issue. Maybe, I don't know. Try 50 cm.
Maybe do that one on that one.
Okay, I'm not sure why that's occurring, but all right. So just close that. Now, the only other thing that you'll need to do is actually untick. See the settings down here. There's a setting called bump. I'll get you to untick bump.
What is bump?
Bump is really a setting that gives the material a bit of texture, so it's might make it look a bit rough. As in bump, probably include bump on something like a type, brickwork that has a bit of a texture to it or a texture coat. But it doesn't. I guess they're sort of asking to switch it off here because it doesn't really apply to carpet.
Then why, when we duplicated from the previous carpet, is it already selected? Because it means that previous carpet was bumped.
I don't know. I guess, these sort of things, it's just a requirement of the exercise. It doesn't mean you have to do it. Okay. So a lot of these things with materials, a lot of it is experimentation. So if you, do a rendering and you think, okay, well, let's sort of see what the carpet looks like with bump ticked. And you render it and you think, oh, that looks pretty good. If it's unticked and it looks flat, then you make the call. Okay. But it's just the exercise is calling for that to be unticked.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, just lastly, if you go across to the graphics tab, a couple of things here. So in the shading section, what I tend to do in most cases is tick this option here, which is use render appearance. So if you can appreciate that if the material is assigned to a floor, for instance, or generally when materials are assigned to objects and you actually shade the view, this area here controls the shaded colour of the object. So if you leave it unticked, you can actually change that colour to anything you like. But generally we sort of try and equate the shaded colour to the actual colour, the appearance colour. Okay, not always, but mostly. Now, the other thing is you can, if you want, include a foreground colour, a surface colour, and a surface pattern, I should say, not colour, pattern. And you can also include a cut pattern if you want to. Now, with carpets, it's entirely up to you whether you want to. When you're having a look at your model, do you want to see these speckles on your floor? With carpet, not necessarily. Okay, if it was concrete, perhaps. Okay. So what we do is we actually remove that pattern. We certainly don't want a cut pattern because we're not, we don't want to see. We're not going to see carpet cut through. But certainly remove the surface pattern. Now to do that you actually click directly on the pattern, and in the fill patterns dialog you scroll all the way up and you select no pattern. Alright, so no pattern. And that's all. That's our material created. So we've gone through the steps. So basically, using the procedure of duplicating an existing. So if you then click apply, that will save the settings or lock the settings in that you've changed. But ultimately, if you want to save your material and its current settings, what do you have to do? Save the file. Okay, save the project. Good. Okay, so, and I would suggest as you're creating these materials, that perhaps as you do them, maybe just exit the browser and save the project. All right, that way you won't. If you crash, you'll lose all the work you've done. Okay, it's like anything in Revit or any other program. Okay, so just drop out, save. Obviously, click apply and OK. Exit the browser, save your project, and then reopen your browser. Now, what we're going to do next, what I'll get you to do next is from the exercise 4-3, you've now created, on page 24, you've created the first of the carpet materials. What I'd like you to do is now create the second one, CPT2. Now, CPT2 can be generated from CPT1. Okay. Now, I'm not too fussed because we've got the texture maps already. You don't need to go to the manufacturer's site. The only reason you'd go to the site now was to actually find the second product, which is the Weimar 12421, and it's a 6688 Pete. So if you wanted to include the correct URL, you'd go back to the site, find the actual model for CPT2, and then copy the URL. So it's up to you. You can do that if you want. But from here, to create the second one, you'll just duplicate the first. Rename it, call it CPT2. And what will you do immediately after that? Duplicate the appearance asset and make it CPT2 as well. Okay, before you do anything else. Okay, so I click duplicate. This one now becomes CPT1 in brackets 1. Okay, I've got a zero up here, which is good, so it's unique. I go down to the information section and I just change that from CPT1 in brackets 1 to CPT2 and apply. Okay, so other than that, you'll need to update the description here. You'll need to update the texture map. You'll need to update the identity data. Okay, essentially based on the information that's provided in the PDF here. Okay, so you see the locations, see where it's being used: Open Office, Public Accent or Accent. The colour is the 6688 Peat, and the style is this Weimar or Weimar 12421. Okay, so you just need to update that information. So I'll just let you work through that. Won't take you too long, hopefully. Okay, so I think by now you've all created the 3 carpet materials. We're going to move on now to having a look at the next set of materials, which is paint. But before we do that, can I just have everyone's attention? Okay, so you'll need to have a look at this, please, everyone. What I'd like you to do now is we're going to create a library for these materials. All right, so this is your library, and the library that you now create will be used for your assessment task. So it's one that you can, you can obviously create now and add your current materials to it. In the assessment task, you will be required to create other materials which you will add to the library as well. And what I'm going to get you to do in the assessment task, you will assign a combination of custom materials, your own materials that you produce. You might use some of these that you're producing in the exercise, and you'll actually use some standard materials from the AEC collection. So if you use materials from the AEC collection down here, how do they then get up into your project?
It's a load into project, isn't it?
Yeah, so if you're going to use one of the materials down here, you actually have to add the material to your document or your project so you can use it. Now, when you actually move it up to here, ultimately what I'd like you to do is then add it back to your own library. Okay, so it's a 2-step process. So at the end of the assessment task, or one of the requirements of the assessment task is you're going to give me your library. And I'm going to have a look at all the materials that you've assigned from your library. So every material that you've used in your assessment task will be in your library, whether it be from the exercise today and next week, ones that you've created for yourself, custom ones, plus any standard materials you've used. Okay, so I can get a snapshot of all the materials that you've used in your assessment task. So to create your own library, down in the lower left-hand corner here, if you just expand this list, you've got open existing library and create new library. Okay, so even if you are still, I'd like everyone to do this with me now, okay? Because I'm not going to go through it again. Even if you are creating materials, if you can just do this now. Create new library. Now, the library itself is a physical file that is created, and it has an ADSKLIB file extension. Okay, so it's a physical file, and it's this library file is like a database. Okay, so once you add materials to it, it adds to the database. Now, what it doesn't include is the texture maps that you are using. Okay, so they still remain separate. So what I'm proposing is that the name of the library and I'll push that down, is the first two characters of the library name are your initials. And please don't use my initials, okay? Use your own, all right?
Okay.
You know. So let me, okay. So that becomes the library name, all right? So they are your materials. So you put your initials against it.
Where are we saving that into?
You are saving that into the folder name called /material library, the one you created at the beginning of the session. Okay, is it making sense? Okay, so the top one is the library name, and the actual library itself, the physical file that you create as a library, is going into this folder here. And it's going into, and I'll just create that. Okay, so I'll just expand that. So I'll collapse this one. So you've got AEC materials and you've got your own library now. All right, is everyone okay with that? Yeah. If you mouse over, without clicking, if you mouse over the actual library itself, it actually tells you where it's located. Yeah. Okay, so just double check that. Okay, now what you'll do is, once the library is created, can you just highlight it, right mouse on it, and click Create Category. Now we're going to create 3 categories initially, but we're not going to do them all at once. And there's a good reason for that. The thing is that when you create your categories, you have to immediately put something in them, otherwise they don't save. Okay, so if you create categories without materials in them and you exit the editor here, those categories will disappear. So the first one is going to be called flooring. Okay, so our first category is flooring. Yeah, okay, so you've got your new library created. You've now created a category called flooring. Now to add your three materials to the library and into the category, just go up to your materials here, right mouse, choose add to, find the library name, and then go across and click the category. Okay, and then do that with the other two. So right mouse, add to, library, category. Okay, so we've now created the library itself, and the library that you've created will be obviously used from now on for the exercises that we are undertaking. It will also be used, as I said, during and for your assessment task. So as you create materials, you're going to add them to your library as you go. And I guess just obviously keep a track of those two folders that you've produced, the 2 and the 4, number 4 folder, the texture maps and the material library. With the assessment task, you'll be required to create additional folders, but that will be explained to you in the student instructions as part of the assessment task. So yeah, so we're now obviously looking at the management of these materials, which is important. So I guess the idea is to locate these new folders, and anything that you acquire, keep them on an external drive. Okay, so I think by now everyone should have a USB drive, and these folders are being saved on that USB drive. Therefore, they become portable. Now, the thing is that now that the library is created, if you want to access the library at home, and as I've said before, during the assessment task, you're going to, any material that you create as a custom material is going to be added to the library once it's created. So the idea is that it doesn't reside in a project, the material itself, anything that you create. It is produced in the project, but it also is then transferred to the library. And the library itself, given that it's a separate file, is transportable, so you can actually take it to another physical location and link it to your Revit installation at home, for instance, which is what you'll do. So if you're going to work on this at home, you'll have to link the library to your Revit installation at home. So the thing is that if I right mouse on the library here and I say remove library, it then removes it from my Revit installation here on this computer. Now, if I then want to, let's say I'm going to another location with another Revit installation, I then open up the material browser, I go to this icon here, and I go open existing library. So to use your library somewhere else, you're going to have to open it, locate it in this folder. Okay, so there it is there, and then click open. And it's now available in another physical location. Yeah, question?
Why do you have to remove it?
I only removed it here to show you how to relink it. Okay, you don't have to remove it.
When you finish with Revit today, you don't have to remove
No. There's no requirement for you to remove the library from these computers. I just did it to show you how you would, if it wasn't, if this was a new installation of Revit and it wasn't showing, I've just removed it so I can show you how to relink it. That's all. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just to protect your confidentiality if you got it. If you don't want anyone else to know.
The thing is that in the classroom here, because the library itself is on a remote hard drive of your own, the mere fact of you ejecting the hard drive is going to remove it from the Revit anyway. And even if you don't plug your hard drive back in again for your next session and you open up Revit, it may be listed there, but it'll have a triangular yellow triangle there with a question mark in it because Revit can't find it if you haven't plugged your USB back in. Okay, so and I guess that's one of the common problems with libraries that travel, and I'll call that's what they are. So they're going from home to here and back again. That you have to go through this constant relinking because ultimately it's looking for the library on a particular drive, and the drive has a letter. Now the drive letter at TAFE is going to be different to the drive letter at home, so it's not going to easily find it unless you tell it where it is. If that makes sense, yeah.
What about like a cloud storage OneDrive? Does it automatically update wherever you are from the cloud each time that you log back in? The library was stored on OneDrive.
I don't know the answer to that. Sure. It's something you could perhaps try. The cloud option is a good idea. Is to have it's always best to have these libraries in one location only, which never changes. Ideally, okay. But if you can appreciate that if the library itself, when it travels, both folders have to travel together. Because the library, so Revit has to find the library, but the library has to find the texture maps. So it becomes quite complicated. So you've got to go through this sort of, you've got to maybe relink the library to the program, and B, you've got to relink the texture maps to the materials in some cases.
Is that changed if the texture maps aren't
materials? Yeah, no, the thing is that the texture maps, if you use texture maps, they become an external reference. So they're not embedded in the material itself. They'll always be externally referenced, and that's the issue, really. And I guess there are, a few other programs that do rendering. Revit's not the only one, but the other programs that do this rendering seem to have a better, way of managing materials. Yeah, this is quite clunky. This is quite clunky. And I guess the thing is that if you are doing if you've assigned a material, you're doing a render, and Revit can't find the texture map that's required by the material, it will tell you prior to the render. So then you have to go back and then relink, and I'll talk about that later. And I guess because that's a huge issue with obviously the management of materials and the fact that the library and the texture maps are always travelling. It's just the nature of it. So, for external students that are just working at home on a single PC, it's never an issue. It's really just students coming to class that it becomes an issue. So, okay. We're going to have a look at the paint materials next. All right, we're going to move on now to the next set of materials, which are paint colours. So if you do have your material browser open, I'll get you to just change the search here to show all materials. So project materials all. Having a look at the PDF the exercise document here. If you move forward now to page 30, we're going to look at creating a series of paint colours. So there's actually 5 in total. Now the paint manufacturer is this one here, Sherwin-Williams. Anyone heard of that manufacturer of paint before? No? I believe you can buy Sherwin-Williams paint in this country. I think I've seen it around in Adelaide actually. But it's a paint manufacturer from the United States. Now, again, the companies that we're dealing with, the carpet company, the paint company, and the tile company that we're working with, these companies are basically US companies, given that this is comes from a US publication. So we're going to create, we're going to have a look at creating the first of these colours, PT1. Now, probably what I'll get you to do first is if you can actually just follow the link here to the Sherwin-Williams site. And we're going to do a search for the first colour, which has a code of SW0051, and it's known as Classic Ivory. So I have provided a link on the Learn site as well. So here, Sherwin-Williams. Now, if you now when the site opens, it looks quite different to the image here in the PDF. However, if you go up here to the search box up here and just put in SW0051, it comes up with the Classic Ivory paint colour here in the under the search criteria. So SW0051. Okay, so click on that one, and that'll take you to this location. Right, so everyone managed to do that? Find that? If you can then go to the details button here, so just go across to details. Now, again, to create this first paint material, once we start creating it, one of the first things we're going to do is obviously we're going to capture the URL. So you can probably do that now. Just highlight the URL and do a Control-C. Note under details here, you've got some codes here. You've got RGB and a hex value and an LRV number. Has anybody worked with colours and hues and shades and so forth, perhaps in Photoshop or other photo editing software? So, a little bit. So, do you know what RGB stands for? Red, green, blue. So they are the, I guess, the component colours or the core colours that make up any colour. So depending on the, I guess the value of each of them will depend on what the colour is. So for these colours off this website, the manufacturer gives you the RGB, which is extremely useful. because ultimately we can plug those numbers into our Revit material and recreate the exact colour. But the thing is that I guess if you're looking at local paint manufacturers, such as maybe Dulux or Solver, if you go onto their websites, you may not get these RGB values. So I guess to that end, any idea, if you wanted to replicate a colour from Dulux or Solver and didn't have the RGB, anyone know how you would do that?
Add a picture or something, then you'll use the expert.
Yeah, well, I wouldn't necessarily try and capture a photograph of the colour. I think when it comes to paint colours, it's best to use the RGB. But the thing is that what you might do, well, having said don't use a photograph of the colour, what you can do is maybe download the image as a JPG, load it into a program like Adobe Photoshop or a photo editing program, and the Adobe Photoshop will allow you to actually do something called a colour picker. I don't know if has anyone ever done that? So you can actually use a tool within the program that will actually sort of, you can right mouse on the colour, and you don't even need to download it. You can actually sort of do it straight from the website, and the colour picker will actually give you the RGB of that colour. But you need to do it through the photo editing software. Okay, so that's one way you can do it. Now the thing is, you don't need to have Adobe Photoshop for that. I mean, there are quite a number of free photo editing programs you can use. You don't have to sort of use Photoshop. You can use others, but that's the technique. It's called colour picking. So you'll actually get a little eyedropper, click on the colour sample, and the program will tell you what the RGB values are, and you just write them down. But fortunately, we have them here. So I guess to replicate this colour in Revit, we need to sort of note the RGB. So two things we need from the site. One is the URL and the other is the RGB. Okay. So just coming back to Revit, to begin creating the material, what we do is we select the material gypsum wallboard. So we look for that material because that's the one we're going to duplicate. Now, I guess the reasoning behind this is in the creation of the paint material or the paint colour, the reasoning here is that if the paint is going on to plasterboard or gyprock in our case, we would choose a material that reflects that particular product. Now, I'm not entirely convinced that that is true. Okay, that's what the exercise is stating, that it's best to sort of use a material, an existing material that sort of matches the actual product that you're putting the paint onto. Okay, and I don't totally agree with that, but we'll go with what the exercise is asking us to do. So this is the one we start with for the duplication. Now, when you duplicate it, I'm going to get you just to call it PT1. Okay, don't worry about putting in gypsum wallboard, just PT1. So up in the search here, we do a search for gypsum. So you'll have ceiling board and wall board. Okay, so select the wall board, right mouse and duplicate, and call it PT1. Okay. So from here, the first thing we're going to do is just fill in the identity data for this first material, this first paint material. Now the first thing that you'll need to do is actually change the class to paint. And just put in where it's being used. So in this case, it's walls. Yep. So just going back to the PDF here. Okay. Yeah. So it's being used for walls. The manufacturer is Sherwin-Williams. The paint code is SW0051, and the paint colour name is Classic Ivory. Just pop back to the website and then copy that. Under mark, we'll put in the name of the PT1, which is the name of the material. Comments, walls. Sherwin-Williams. Okay, and apply. All right, everyone okay with that so far? Okay, so we'll then go directly to the appearance asset. Now, a slightly different approach here. We're not going to duplicate the appearance asset. Okay, we're not going to duplicate this one. I don't know if you recall me saying, I guess in our last session, I may not have said it, but in this area down here, where we've got the settings that are specific to the appearance asset, it's best not to have these settings as generic. It's better to have them or to have more specific settings that relate to the actual product that you're creating. So in this case, we're dealing with paint. So we need settings that really relate to paint. Now, the current appearance asset is based on a JPG, which is this white colour. We're not going to use an appearance asset that is using a texture map. Okay, we're going to use an appearance asset that is we actually plug the RGB value into, and Revit will actually produce the colour artificially. Okay, which is perfectly fine. So what we do, rather than duplicate, we actually replace the asset. So the thing is that when we replace the asset, it opens up a secondary dialog box which is called the Asset Browser. Now, there's a number of libraries listed here on the left-hand side. Now we're dealing with, we don't want structural or physical assets. We want appearance assets. This one here. So if you expand the appearance library here, okay, so the appearance library, and we're talking about the asset browser. We're just replacing the appearance asset at the moment, this one here. So even the appearance assets are divided up into classes or categories. Now, we're looking for paint, and more specifically, we're looking for wall paint. So there's a wall paint category. So over here, select wall paint. Over on the right-hand side, we have the asset name. We have all the assets listed here. And because the paint colour that we're creating is an off-white, we go for something that's relatively close, in this case beige. If you just highlight beige and go across to the right-hand side here, you've got a little icon that reads, replaces the current asset in the editor with this asset. Okay, so if you click on that little button there, it then replaces this one with this one. Okay, so we now have beige, the appearance asset called beige, in our material. So it's a completely different setup. Okay, when I say a completely different setup, see how we now have in this section here below information, we have this section here called wall paint. And it's really simplified the settings to a degree in that we specify the colour, the finish and the application for the paint. So in this case, it's quite simply a case of, well, firstly, what we do is that given that this is a unique appearance asset in the current project, see the 0, we can rename this one, and we'll just call this PT1. Under description, I'll put in the SW0051 and then classic ivory. We then come down to the colour and click directly on the colour itself, which opens up a colour dialog, and here we can key in the RGB. So did you write down the RGB? 242, 226 and 195. Okay. Now that, yeah, so if you move forward, that's actually given to you on page 33, okay? So, okay, 33, step 49, there's the RGB. Now, having done that, so you put in those RGB values and click OK.
Yeah. Description on page 30. Page 30 gives green as 224.
Oh, does it?
And also on the website for the actual colour states 224.
Does it?
Yeah.
So they've got 242 here, have they? Yeah. So it's actually
No, green.
The middle one.
Oh, green is 224, is it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, that's interesting. So it's a good thing you wrote it down. All right. So 224 is from the website.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's go with that. All right. So so 224. So yeah, no, that's good. I'm glad you picked that up. So 242, 224 and 195 and click OK. Now what you'll also do is change the finish and the application. So the finish was eggshell and the application is roller. And just up here, notice the preview is showing us a series of walls as opposed to a cube. So up here, if you click the line that divides this section and this section, you can actually make that preview larger. See the little cube here at the side of the preview? So just click that, and you've got other options, including scene, environment, and render settings. Now, please, before you, I don't mind if you change any of those, but before you do, click Apply and OK, and just save your project. Okay. Now, the reason for that, and I'll just go back to this material. Now, the reason for that is that I have had systems crash by changing these options here. So, if you can appreciate the scene, you can change, is currently set to walls. You could actually set it back to cube if you wanted to. Okay. Or any of these other ones here that are appropriate. Okay, so because this material obviously being paint or for walls is intended for walls, they've actually set this one to walls. Now the other thing you can do is change the environment from grid light to plaza, and it does change the appearance up here. Snowfield. So if you've got these walls in a snowfield, that's what the colour looks like. Okay. Or what's the other one? Warm light. Okay. And render settings, you can actually show the preview at draft quality or production quality. Okay, so it just gives you a better, obviously a more, an enhanced preview of that. I would suggest that you don't change the render settings, because every time you sort of access a new material, it has to update the, see how it's updating? And that can take a little while, so I'll just maybe leave that at draft. And back, scene is walls, environment is grid light. That's what it was. Now, the only other thing you need to do for this material is go back to the graphics tab and tick render appearance at the top for shading. Now, and then go down to the cut pattern. Okay, go down to the cut pattern, click directly on the swatch here, and scroll up and select no pattern. And OK. So, and click apply, and that's the first of the paint materials created. So, again, we've duplicated to create a new material. We replaced the asset. We changed the number of the asset to PT1. We've updated the description. We've changed the colour based on RGB, and we've changed the finish and application. Okay, so essentially that's the way you create colours, or colours or Revit materials as colours. So I guess in your assessment task, you obviously will require colours to assign to different parts of the building. Obviously you're going to paint certain parts of the building, the exterior perhaps, and this is the way you create the colours. Now I will, in our next session, I'll talk about getting hold of a specific library of materials for colour bond colours and for colour bond based materials such as corrugated iron and trim deck and other roof and fencing profiles. So there is a library that is produced specifically for that will give you all of those materials without you having to create them. And once you actually obtain the library, and the library itself is the library file. For instance, the one we created today, someone has already created a library file of all those materials and has provided you with all of the texture maps that support those materials in that library. And the thing is, essentially what you do to use the library, you actually go down to the button here and you open existing library and go off and find that file, and it will actually appear in your list down here, and you'll see all the materials over here from that ColourBond library. Okay, so in your assessment task, if you're using steel products, which ultimately you will, so roof covering, gutters, downpipes, and fencing, you can actually take the materials from this library. All right. Now, I guess just to finish off, I guess, I don't know, it's up to you. Do you want to tackle the next colour? We can at least make a start on it. So, having a look at the PDF, so we've done the first one through here. Now, if you go to step 55 on page 34. Okay, repeating the steps just covered, create a material for PT2 through to PT5 as shown on page 4-30. Now, PT2 should be duplicated from material steel paint finish ivory matte. Okay. Now, PT3 is derived from gypsum ceiling board, and PT4 and 5 is derived from PT1. Okay, so 2 and 3 you've actually got to duplicate an existing material. Well, 4 and 5 you do as well, but you actually copy 4 and 5, or copy PT1 to produce 4 and 5. So with the steel paint finish ivory matte, if you then go up and do a search up here in the search box, so steel paint finish ivory. Now, just resize your material browser. In doing a search for putting in those keywords as a search, now you probably won't have the material in your project, but you'll actually see it down here under AEC materials. Can you see it down here? So it's this first one here. Sorry, was that, sorry, steel paint finish ivory matte. Steel paint finish ivory matte. No, sorry, my apology, the bottom one. Steel paint finish ivory matte. It's the bottom one here.
One's got a padlock on it.
Okay, now to use that material, okay, so to actually use it and duplicate it, you need to add it to your project. Is anyone having difficulty finding it?
I found it through metal.
Yeah. So when you find it, just add it to your document. I've already got it up here actually, so I'm just going to cancel that. So it'll actually appear up here. And then from here, I can then duplicate. And what I'll do, before I do that, I'll actually just close that search. Okay, and then just right mouse and duplicate, and then just change the name here to PT2. Okay, now once it's created, if you then go back and do a search, just put in PT, you'll actually see your carpet materials plus the two paint materials that you're currently working on. So this one here, PT2, okay, how are we going with, everyone okay with that? Anyone a little bit lost or? All right. All right, so with PT2, of course, we've duplicated the that AEC material. Now, what I suggest, the way to approach this one, after you've put in the identity information, what I suggest you do, maybe before you put in your identity information, just go to your Appearance tab, and in this case, because this is already wall paint, okay, because this is wall paint already, what we can do, rather than replace the asset, we'll just duplicate it. Okay, so I mean, you can replace it if you want to, but it might be just as easy to actually make a duplicate of it. Under information, just call it PT2. And the paint colour for the second of our colours, or the so the actual paint colour, going back to, just bear with me, I'll just go back up to the list. Okay, so for PT2, the colour code and the paint colour name is SW7068, and it's called Grizzle Grey. I'd like you to actually use the local correct spelling of grey, okay, G-R-E-Y, okay, but Grizzle Grey. Okay, now again, coming back to the information here. So Revit materials settings for PT2, so the application, okay, is brush and the finish is semi-gloss. Okay, so brush and semi-gloss. So that's the settings down here. So finish is brush, finish is semi-gloss, and the application is brush. All you need to do now is actually change the colour, the RGB. So the RGB for this one is 99, 101 and 98. On the graphics tab, we're going to tick render appearance. That's all we need to do there. And just coming back to identity, of course, I'm going to change the class or classification to paint. So where it's being used under comments, so going back to the list here in the PDF, so it's being used on interior HM doors and frames / steel. Manufacturer Sherwin-Williams. The model is the SW 7068. The URL, you'll need to obtain that from the website, and the mark is PT2. Okay, and apply. So that's now completed that second paint material. So before we exit the browser, now just before we finish up, we're going to finish up with right on time now. But just quickly, can you just go back to your newly created library here and create a new category call it paint. Okay, so a new category called paint. So you've currently got flooring, and you'll now have paint as categories. So now that you've created that category called paint, just add your 2 paint colours. So I'll just do a search here for PT, which will pick up these 2 paint colours. And again, right mouse, add to materials, paint. So the category of paint. And right mouse, add to library, paint. So to date, you've got your 2 paint materials here, and you've got your 3 carpet materials here. Okay. All right. So if you haven't quite finished those, can I get you to sort of get up to at least this stage by the start of next week's session? We probably won't spend too much more time on the paint colours, so I would like you to create all of them, but I'd like to move on next week and have a look at creating tile materials. So if you can find the time, try and create the other 3 paint materials for the collection. All right? All right, thanks everyone. We'll see you next week.